Republican presidential contender Rick Perry blasted Donald Trump with some of the strongest language we've heard in the escalating feud between Trump and some members of the GOP.
The White House has been occupied by giants, but from time to time it is sought by the small-minded, the divisive figures, propelled by anger, appealing to the worst instincts in the human condition. He offers a barking carnival act that can best be described as Trumpism. A toxic mix of demagoguery and mean-spiritedness and nonsense that will lead the Republican Party to perdition if pursued. Let no one be mistaken. Donald Trump's candidacy is a cancer on conservatism, and it must be clearly diagnosed, excised, and discarded.
Steve, so Rick Perry says that Donald Trump is destroying conservatism. Lindsey Graham was destroying cell phones today after what happened with Donald Trump. And Rand Paul is destroying the tax code in a video that came out yesterday.
What's happening is that Donald Trump is getting all the attention with the Republican field, and you're seeing these folks really just trying to break through a little bit. There's 16 people running in the Republican Party right now for president, and Donald Trump is the focus of all of that.
I mean, I would tell my fellow Republicans, let's stop treating Donald Trump like a Republican. He's not a conservative. He is not a liberal. He's not a Democrat. He's not a Republican. He's not an independent. He believes in Donald Trump. That is what is happening. The idea of America is slipping away. We must not let that happen on our watch. Do we depend on proven conservative principles like Ronald Reagan did? Or do we turn this over to a narcissist who only believes in himself?
If we Republicans choose Donald Trump as our nominee, the prospects for a safe and prosperous future are greatly diminished. Donald Trump lacks the temperament to be president. After all, this is an individual who mocked a disabled reporter. Donald Trump says he admires Vladimir Putin. At the same time, he's called George W. Bush a liar. That is a twisted example of evil trumping good. There's a dark irony in his boasts of his sexual exploits during the Vietnam War, while at the same time, John McCain, whom he has mocked, was imprisoned and tortured. Dishonesty is Donald Trump's hallmark. His imagination must not be married to real power. Think of Donald Trump's personal qualities: the bullying, the greed, the showing off, the misogyny, the absurd third-grade theatrics. There's plenty of evidence that Mr. Trump is a con man, a fake. Mr. Trump has changed his positions not just over the years, but over the course of the campaign. He has too much to hide. Mr. Trump is directing our anger for less than noble purposes. He creates scapegoats of Muslims and Mexican immigrants. This is the very brand of anger that has led other nations into the abyss. Donald Trump is a phony, a fraud. His promises are as worthless as a degree from Trump University. This is a time for choosing. He has neither the temperament nor the judgment to be president. His personal qualities would mean that America would cease to be a shining city on a hill.
George Bush made a mistake. We can make mistakes, but that one was a beauty. We should have never been in Iraq. You do whatever you want. You call it whatever you want. I want to tell you, they lied. Okay. They said there were weapons of mass destruction. There were none.
While Donald Trump was building a reality TV show, my brother was building a security apparatus to keep us safe, and I'm proud of what he did.
I think I'm much more competent than all of them. When you talk about George Bush, I mean, say what you want, the World Trade Center came down during his time.
I would have been much different, I must tell you. Somebody said, well, it wouldn't have been any different. Well, it would have been. I'm extremely tough on people coming into this country. I believe that if I were running things, I doubt those families would have, I doubt that those people would have been in the country.
Here to respond to more details, 2016 Republican presidential candidate, former Florida Governor Jeb Bush. Governor, good to see you. That question that you were answering is whether or not you trust Donald Trump to have his finger on our nuclear arsenal. And your answer was no.
We need a steady hand. We need someone that understands the grave threats in America's leadership in the world. And his view of history is just wrong. The simple fact is that when we were attacked, my brother created an environment where for 2,600 days we were safe. No one attacked us again. And moving on to what the threats are today is what we ought to be focused on. Donald Trump is not a serious candidate as it relates to foreign policy. In the last month, Donald Trump has said, let ISIS take out Assad. And then he says, let Russia take out ISIS. He was happy that Russia is in Syria. That is not in our strategic interest to allow Russia to gain influence.
But try and apply some logic to what Trump is doing here.
I have no idea other than he got mad and he doesn't have the temperament or judgment to control himself when he gets mad. I'm not going to try to get into the mind of Donald Trump because I don't think there's a whole lot of space there. I think he's a kook. I think he's crazy. I think he's unfit for office. He's not a conservative Republican. He's an opportunist. He could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue and 25 or 30% of the people would still follow him because he gives voice to their anger and their frustration. But he's not fit to be President of the United States. Any Republican who would accuse George W. Bush of lying to the American people about the Iraq War and being responsible for 9/11 is not a Republican. They're an extremist. They're crazy.
Okay.
We would get slaughtered as a party if Donald Trump's our nominee, and quite frankly, we would deserve it. Well, I want to talk to the Trump supporters for a minute. I don't know who you are, and I don't know why you like this guy. He's a race-baiting, xenophobic, religious bigot. He doesn't represent my party. He doesn't represent the values that the men and women who wear the uniform are fighting for. Now, we have young men and women in harm's way all over the world, particularly in the Mideast. They were concerned about this rhetoric because the enemy will use it against us. Because what Mr. Trump is doing, and I don't think he has a clue about anything, he's just trying to get his numbers up and get the biggest reaction he can. He's putting our soldiers and diplomats at risk. He's empowering the enemy. And what Mr. Trump is doing is undercutting everything we stand for. He's undercutting how you win the war. He's empowering the enemy, and he's putting people at risk who are serving our country. Now, he's never served. Going to a military high school, Donald, is really not military service. And you know how you make America great again? Tell Donald Trump to go to hell.
Donald Trump is being blasted today for insulting his rival Carly Fiorina's looks.
He is attacking the only Republican woman in the race, insulting the way she looks.
It happened while Trump was watching Fox News with a Rolling Stone reporter for this week's cover story. When Fiorina appeared on the TV, Trump blurted, "Look at that face. Would anyone vote for that? Can you imagine that, the face of our next president? I mean, she's a woman, and I'm not supposed to say bad things, but really, folks, come on, are we serious?"
Probably I did say something like that about Carla. I'm talking about persona. I'm not talking about look, although when I get criticized for my hair, which isn't that bad, you know, you've seen me, right? It's not that bad.
Last week in Rolling Stone magazine, Donald Trump said the following about you, quote, "Look at that face. Would anyone vote for that? Can you imagine that, the face of our next president?" Mr. Trump later said he was talking about your persona, not your appearance. Please feel free to respond what you think about his persona.
You know, it's interesting to me. Mr. Trump said that he heard Mr. Bush very clearly and what Mr. Bush said. I think women all over this country heard very clearly what Mr. Trump said.
But now Marco Rubio is coming out swinging.
He's a very insecure person. He doesn't like to be criticized. You know, the presidency's a tough job. You're going to be criticized, and you can't flip out every time somebody says something about you. He does. I think it's important for people to understand they have a choice to make. Look, if this pattern continues, the conservative movement and the Republican Party is going to be taken over by a con artist, by someone who's portraying himself as the fighter of the ordinary person. You know, he's out there fighting for the working man, but in fact, Donald Trump has spent years sticking it to the working people, because there is no way that the party of Reagan and the conservative movement, I'm going to allow it to be taken over by a con artist. Florida is not going to vote for a con artist, and it's not going to vote for someone who in Palm Beach right now is not hiring willing Americans that are willing to work. Instead, he's importing workforce from abroad, but he's out there some sort of immigration crusader. It's a fraud. We're going to expose it.
So what do you think a Trump government would look like, Senator?
It would be chaos. He is wholly unprepared to be president of the United States. He refuses to answer questions on any specific public policy. This is the most important government job on the planet. We're about to turn over the conservative movement to a person that has no ideas of any substance on the important issues, the nuclear codes of the United States, to an erratic individual.
Donald Trump alleges that my dad was involved in assassinating JFK. Now, let's be clear. This is nuts. This is not a reasonable position. This is just kooky. I'm going to tell you what I really think of Donald Trump. This man is a pathological liar. He doesn't know the difference between truth and lies. He lies practically every word that comes out of his mouth. And in a pattern that I think is straight out of a psychology textbook, his response is to accuse everybody else of lying. And it's simply a mindless yell. Whatever he does, he accuses everyone else of doing. The man cannot tell the truth, but he combines it with being a narcissist. A narcissist at a level I don't think this country's ever seen.
The reason I didn't support Trump the last time is I was afraid that he would be a divider and not a unifier. And our best leaders historically have been unifiers, Republicans and Democrats. But unfortunately, as I've watched him over the last 3.5 years now, he's continued to do that. And I don't think the country does well when we're divided. And I believe we need a new direction. We just can't keep going the way that we're going. What I've known is that when people work together, remarkable and good things can happen. But when we constantly are divided, when we can't work together, we can see what's happening when we look at Washington even today.
49 hours declaring it a riot.
5 to 50, be advised, Capitol Police 1 advised they're trying to breach and get into the Capitol.
50, we have a breach of the Capitol! Breach of the Capitol! We need to hold the doors of the Capitol. I need public support. We lost the line. We lost the line. All MPDs get back! All MPDs get back up to the upper deck! All MPDs get back to the upper deck!
They were peaceful people. These were great people. The crowd was unbelievable. And I mentioned the word love, the love in the air. I've never seen anything like it.
Here's Senator Mitt Romney, one of the first and only Republican voices to condemn the events of today as...
And I saw the images being broadcast around the world, and it breaks my heart. I have 25 grandchildren. Many of them were watching TV, thinking about this building, whether their grandpa was okay. Now we gather due to a selfish man's injured pride and the outrage of supporters who he has deliberately misinformed for the past 2 months and stirred to action this very morning. What happened here today was an insurrection incited by the President of the United States. Those who choose to continue to support his dangerous gambit by objecting to the results of a legitimate democratic election will forever be seen as being complicit in an unprecedented attack against our democracy. The best way we can show respect for the voters who are upset is by telling them the truth. That's the burden. That's the duty of leadership. The truth is that President-elect Biden won the election. President Trump lost. I've had that experience myself. It's no fun. And in light of today's sad circumstances, I ask my colleague, do we weigh our own political fortunes more heavily than we weigh the strength of our republic, the strength of our democracy, and the cause of freedom? What's the weight of personal acclaim compared to the weight of conscience?
The president bears responsibility for Wednesday's attack on Congress.
President Trump is responsible for provoking the events of the day.
The president's language and rhetoric crossed a line, and it was reckless.
The president needs to understand that his actions were the problem, not the solution.
This is the cost of telling thousands of people that there is a legitimate shot of overturning the election.
Last week's violent attack on the Capitol was undemocratic, un-American, and criminal. Violence is never a legitimate form of protest. The president bears responsibility for Wednesday's attack on Congress by mob rioters.
There's no question, none, that President Trump is practically and morally responsible for provoking the events of the day. No question about it. The people who stormed this building believed they were acting on the wishes and instructions of their president. He didn't take steps so federal law could be faithfully executed and order restored. No. Instead, according to public reports, he watched television happily, as the chaos unfolded. He kept pressing his scheme to overturn the election. Now, even after it was clear to any reasonable observer that Vice President Pence was in serious danger, the president sent a further tweet attacking his own vice president.
January 6, 2021 was the first time one American president refused his constitutional duty to transfer power peacefully to the next. At the beginning of our investigation, we understood that tens of millions of Americans had been persuaded by President Trump that the 2020 election was stolen by overwhelming fraud. And we also knew this was flatly false. Our legal system functioned as it should, but our president would not accept the outcome. Among the most shameful of this committee's findings was that President Trump sat in the dining room off the Oval Office watching the violent riot at the Capitol on television. For hours, he would not issue a public statement instructing his supporters to disperse and leave the Capitol, despite urgent pleas from his White House staff and dozens of others to do so. During this time, law enforcement agents were attacked and seriously injured. The Capitol was invaded, the electoral count was halted, and the lives of those in the Capitol were put at risk. This was an utter moral failure and a clear dereliction of duty. No man who would behave that way at that moment in time can ever serve in any position of authority in our nation again. He is unfit for any office.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to my colleagues on the committee. Thank you to our witnesses. I never expected today to be quite as emotional for me as it has been. I've talked to a number of you and gotten to know you. You know, democracies are not defined by our bad days. We're defined by how we come back from bad days. Many in my party have treated this as just another partisan fight. This cannot continue to be a partisan fight. And serving on this committee, I'm here to investigate January 6th, not in spite of my membership in the Republican Party, but because of it. Not to win a political fight, but to learn the facts and defend our democracy. Mr. Chairman, I was called on to serve during the summer riots as an Air National Guardsman. I condemn those riots and the destruction of property that resulted. But not once did I ever feel that the future of self-governance was threatened like I did on January 6th. There is a difference between breaking the law and rejecting the rule of law, between a crime, even grave crimes, and a coup.
Former Attorney General Bill Barr saying he's shocked by how sensitive the documents are at the center of the new indictment against his old boss he defended quite often in the past, says, quote, the Justice Department alleges the documents included information regarding defense and weapons capabilities of both the United States and foreign countries, our nuclear programs, potential vulnerabilities of the United States and its allies to military attack, and plans for possible retaliation in response to foreign attack. Now, it goes on to say the unauthorized disclosure of these classified documents could put at risk the national security of the United States, foreign relations, and the safety of the United States military and human sources. I want to bring in Donald Trump's former national security advisor, John Bolton. He joins us now. Mr. Bolton, look, you are neither secretive nor subtle about your desire to see the former president out of the race for president or to be a candidate for president. I want to ask you about what these documents actually mean. Tell people from a national security perspective what's in the documents laid out in this indictment.
If he has anything like what the indictment alleges, and of course the government will have to prove it, then he has committed very serious crimes. This is a devastating indictment. I speak here as an alumnus of the Justice Department myself, because not only is it powerful, it's very narrowly tailored. They didn't throw everything up against the wall to see what would stick. This really is a rifle shot, and I think it should be the end of Donald Trump's political career.
I've been interested to see some of your Republican counterparts who maybe aren't as hyperbolic, I guess would be the word, saying, look, this isn't great, but a trial or an indictment of a former president and the front runner in the Republican nomination is far worse for the country than what actually happened here. What do you make of that?
You know, Republicans used to believe that not prosecuting criminals led to more crime. The answer here is take the politics out of the decision, and in this case, proceed with the prosecution and do the same for anybody else who does anything even remotely like it. You know, we hear a lot these days about public opinion polls taken over the weekend. Political leadership doesn't take public opinion polls as blocks of granite. They're interesting pieces of information. Political leaders change public opinion. I think it's critical for those who seek to be the Republican nominee to tell Republican voters the truth about this indictment. Just read the indictment and ask yourself, if the government can prove what they allege here, shouldn't this man go to jail? Throughout my 17 months there, it's perfectly clear that Donald Trump addressed almost everything that came before him through the prism of the question, how does this benefit Donald Trump? The simple fact he had the documents, for any reason or no reason, should subject him to prosecution.
Donald John Trump.
No other president has had so many former top aides making such harsh public assessments. Most recently, Cassidy Hutchinson.
I think that Donald Trump is the most grave threat that we will face to our democracy in our lifetime and potentially in American history.
She joins a growing chorus.
I think he's unfit for office.
He will always put his own interests and gratifying his own ego ahead of everything else.
Thank you.
And today, Trump's longest-serving former chief of staff, John Kelly, is chiming in with his harshest criticism yet, calling President Trump, quote, a person that has no idea what America stands for and has no idea what America is all about, including the stunning detail that Trump turned to Kelly on Memorial Day at Arlington National Cemetery in 2017 and asked, I don't get it. What was in it for them? This is Kelly confirming on the record stories of Trump insulting Senator John McCain and former President George H.W. Bush because in Vietnam and in World War II, respectively, the former aviators were shot down. Kelly describes Trump as, quote, a person that thinks those who defend their country in uniform or are shot down or seriously wounded in combat or spend years being tortured as POWs are all, quote, suckers because, quote, there is nothing in it for them. A person that did not want to be seen in the presence of military amputees because, quote, it doesn't look good for me. a person that demonstrated open contempt for a Gold Star family, for all Gold Star families, on TV during the 2016 campaign, and rants that our most precious heroes who gave their lives in America's defense are, quote, losers and wouldn't visit their graves in France. Kelly confirming on the record a story reported in the book The Divider, where Trump tells Kelly he wants a military parade, like one he saw for Bastille Day in France, except he does not want any wounded veterans. To CNN, Kelly calls Trump a hypocrite, saying he is, quote, not truthful regarding his position on the protection of unborn life, on women, on minorities, on evangelical Christians, on Jews, on working men and women. And he concludes Trump is, quote, a person that has nothing but contempt for our democratic institutions, our Constitution, and the rule of law. He concludes, there is nothing more that can be said. God help us. Kelly also criticized Trump for saying that former Joint Chiefs of Staff Chairman General Mark Milley should be executed. In a departure speech on Friday, Milley responded,
we don't take an oath to a king or a queen or to a tyrant or a dictator, and we don't take an oath to a wannabe dictator.
Some of the people who know Donald Trump the best now warning of the threat they think he poses if elected in November 2024.
Trump's obviously the leading candidate for the Republican presidential nomination. He's neck and neck with President Biden in the general election, if not slightly ahead. Does it concern you that he could once again serve as commander-in-chief and the head of the armed forces?
Well, it appalls me that he could be elected president again. And I think that, as I've said repeatedly on any number of occasions, he did damage in his first term, has largely been repaired, but that if he were elected to a second term, this time he might damage that would be irreparable. This is a very dangerous period we're about to enter into here. I think the central point of what John Kelly said goes to really the essence of Donald Trump. The only thing he cares about is Donald Trump. Everything else is instrumental.
You said the other day Donald Trump is a TV star, nothing more, nothing less, and that, quote, if we put him back in the White House, the reruns will be worse than the original show was. Why worse?
Oh, because he's so angry now. He's angry and he's vengeful, and he said, I will be your retribution. He wants to be retribution for himself. I am convinced that if he goes back to the White House, that the next 4 years will all be about him just settling scores, Anderson, with everybody who he thinks wasn't perfectly nice to him. And he has shown himself, and I think particularly in his post-presidency, to be completely self-centered, completely self-consumed.
I want to ask you about the indictments that we've seen. Yesterday, former Attorney General Bill Barr called the indictment, quote, very damning, and he said if even half of it is true, then he's toast.
It is a very tight, very detailed, evidence-laden indictment, and the conduct in there is awful. I mean, put aside taking the documents in the first place, but then when you start getting asked, Anderson, in May of 21, nicely, with a letter from the archivist saying, could you please give them back? And you ignore it, ignore it, ignore it. Then they come with a grand jury subpoena, and then according to the indictment, you tell your lawyers, tell them we don't have anything, even though you have dozens and dozens of boxes of material. That's obstruction of justice if it's true. There's so much. I mean, first it's the nature of the documents that he kept. I mean, battle plans against Iran, nuclear secrets, the presidential daily brief, which has the most important intelligence information that anyone in the country can get. These are not his personal documents. This isn't like his doodle notes on his pad or like a nice, newspaper article about himself. These are intelligence documents created by the government of the United States. It's our property, and the government's supposed to have that stuff, not laying around. That's one. He is voluntarily putting our country through this. If at any point before the search in August of 22, he had just done what anyone I suspect in this audience would have done, which is say, all right, you're serious? You're serving a grand jury subpoena? Let me just give the documents back. He wouldn't have been charged. Wouldn't have been charged with anything, even though he had kept them for almost a year and a half.
None of this had to happen.
None of this would happen. This is all him saying, again, it's what I was saying at the top. he's saying, I'm more important than the country. These are my papers. He saw in the indictment his boxes. He wants his box. He flew the boxes up to New Jersey for summer vacation. What is this, like they're a family member? And let me ask you a question. What exactly was he doing with them? Did someone remind him he's not the president anymore? This is vanity run amok, Anderson. Run amok. Ego run amok. And he is now going to put this country through this when we didn't have to go through it. Everyone's blaming the prosecutors. He did it. It's his conduct.
You know him very well.
Yes.
Why do you think he did it? I mean,
he cannot live with the fact that he lost to Joe Biden. He can't live with it. But the fact is, he did. And he wants to continue to pretend he's president. He wants the trappings of the presidency around him. And I think one of those trappings is these documents. This is just to show off. And that's what makes it so ridiculous that we're here and we're in a situation where there are people in my own party who are blaming DOJ. How about blame him? He did it.
Including Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. He tweeted, quote, "The weaponization of federal law enforcement represents a mortal threat to a free society." Why do you think they're not addressing what's actually in the indictment?
Because it's indefensible. Look, you all need to know this. They're playing political games with you because they think if you kind of like Trump a little bit, and I don't say anything bad about Trump, and then Trump kind of implodes and goes away, then you're more likely to vote for me. How about you decide who is the most honest, forthright leader who has common sense and will put you first? And let's put that person behind the desk in the Oval Office. Look, everybody, whether you like Donald Trump or you don't like Donald Trump, this conduct is inexcusable, in my opinion, for somebody who wants to be president of the United States.
With more than a half dozen civil and criminal cases on his plate, let's sort out what Donald Trump faces in each state. Civil case number 1, the New York Attorney General's case, now headed to what's expected to be a lengthy trial. A judge recently ruled that Trump and his family and their companies fraudulently inflated the value of their real estate, allowing this case to go to trial. The proceeding will determine other liability and penalties, which could total $250 million, as well as a ban on Trump business dealings in New York. The former president has repeatedly denied wrongdoing, and his attorney has already said he'll appeal the liability ruling. Civil case number 2, also out of New York, this one filed by columnist E. Jean Carroll. Here, a jury found Trump committed sexual abuse in 1996 and later defamed Carroll after she went public with her story. They did not find him liable for rape, but ordered him to pay $5 million total in damages. Trump denies wrongdoing and has appealed the ruling. In September, Carroll filed another civil case against Trump for similar comments he made in 2019. He has denied those claims as well. There's also criminal case number 1 out of Manhattan for allegedly falsifying business records to conceal another crime. A grand jury made up of 23 New Yorkers chosen at random indicted the former president for his alleged involvement in hush money payments to adult film star Stormy Daniels in 2016, then concealing it to prevent the news from damaging his presidential campaign. Trump and his attorneys denied the accusations, and Trump pleaded not guilty.
There were no facts in there. I mean, normally in an indictment you have alleged facts.
Then there's Florida, the documents case. Among the criminal charges, conspiring to obstruct justice. It was federal prosecutors this time with a hefty, detailed filing alleging the former president hoarded classified documents containing national military and nuclear secrets, shared them with friends who had no security clearance, then conspired to hide and conceal some of them from a federal grand jury. The former president again denied the charges and pleaded not guilty.
The baseless indictment of me by the Biden administration's weaponized Department of Injustice will go down as among the most horrific abuses of power.
Criminal indictment number 3 came out of Washington, D.C. It's been described as the January 6th case, but it's really about the entire period after the 2020 election. The criminal charges here include conspiracy to defraud the United States. Special counsel Jack Smith wrote in a scathing indictment, the purpose of the conspiracy was to overturn the legitimate results of the 2020 presidential election by using knowingly false claims of election fraud. He went on with great detail to describe how the former president deliberately disregarded the truth, was determined to stay in power, and developed criminal plans to defeat the federal government. Trump called the indictment fake, and his attorneys have suggested his actions were protected by the Constitution. He pleaded not guilty. And the 4th criminal indictment came out of Georgia. Prosecutors said the grand jury recommended charges against 19 defendants, including former President Trump. He was hit with 13 felony counts, including racketeering and a half dozen conspiracy charges related to the 2020 election.
I just want to find 11,780 votes.
Trump pleaded not guilty, denied wrongdoing, denied any pressure campaign, and called this investigation as well a political witch hunt. The timeline on these cases remains uncertain, but one thing we know for sure, the Constitution does not prohibit an indicted candidate from running for office, nor even a convicted one. Noah Pransky, NBC News.